Hello, everyone. So we are continuing our discussions with dummy variables. In the last few recordings which I have circulated, I did explain what dummy variables are all about and how do we go about making sense of the coefficients of a dummy variable, right? See here, and in our previous discussions, in most of our previous discussions, if you have observed, all examples which I have given were restricted to dummy variables, to such cases where dummy variables have been restricted to dummy independent variables, right? Essentially, when you talk about the way in which we have talked about it, fundamentally, when you consider all the models that I have discussed, all examples which I've mentioned in the previous recordings also, you can see that these dummy variables usually appear as independent variables, right? So there arises a question whether there can be cases where dummy variables can appear as a dependent variable. The answer is yes, right? There are many important research topics for which the dependent variable is appropriately treated as a dummy variable, taking the same values as we have mentioned before, 0 and 1. Okay. Uh, so how does this change and how do we model such kinds of cases? How do we model such cases? That's kind of a very important thing that we need to understand. So the premise of our discussion now is basically this. In all the examples that we have seen now, right? For example, I think we have considered one example where we were talking about the determination of wages, right? So their wages was perhaps the dependent variable. And in the determination of those wages, we considered whether being female or male would make a difference, right? Female was basically the dummy variable that we considered. And we have assigned a value of 1 if the worker is female and 0 if it is a male, right? Similarly, I think we have mentioned about pension plans, right? So such kinds of things that were considered were basically independent variables. We considered dummy variables only as independent variables, right? So that's essentially what we are seeing here, right? Till now, all our discussions were focusing on dummy independent variables, right? Now we are going to move towards such models where dummy variable would appear as a dependent variable. Okay. A few examples, right? Though we may not exactly model in this round, in this manner, right? Just to quote some examples. Like, for example, there can be such questions as how do high school students decide whether to go to college, right? Also, what distinguishes Pepsi drinkers from Coke drinkers? This may not be a this may not be a variable might be which we might be able to quantify very well, right? It would definitely be qualitative in nature, right? So here the difference that happens is the dependent variable here is having a qualitative nature. In all other discussions that we have had, we were talking about variables where the independent variable displayed a qualitative nature, right? But in such cases, as I have mentioned here, for example, how can we convince people to use public transportation instead of driving? See, this variable may be very qualitative in its nature. We may not be able to quantify it very well, right? So such type of variables are basically captured in econometric models as dummy variables. Here, the difference basically in these three cases that we have mentioned here is basically that they are appearing as independent variables. So we are now moving from dummy dependent variables like we have considered before. We have considered the case where we have seen models where you have one dummy dependent variable and two dummy dependent variables. And we also talked about a thumb rule in our earlier recordings as to how many dummy variables to be included in a model, right? Here we are slightly moving away from that and extending our understanding by considering such models where dummy variables can also appear as independent variables. Okay. So in order to estimate such kinds of equations where dummy independent variables would be present, we have two types of models that we talk about. Okay. And these are the two types of models. One is called as a linear probability model. The other is called as the binomial logit model. Okay. These are the two types of models that are talked about. So we'll be talking more on linear probability model in the upcoming video. I hope this premise is very clear to all of you. Right? The recordings are kept short so that it would be easier for you to grasp and also move towards making notes or other related things. And all these recordings which I'm giving you are exclusively based on the book by Student Munt, right? Econometrics book by Student Munt. The earlier discussion on dummy variables comes towards the end of chapter 3. And this discussion, linear probability model, is a discussion that comes towards one of the chapters which comes towards the end. I don't exactly remember the chapter number. I'll definitely convey it in the upcoming report. Thank you.